The death cell was cold and damp, with its concrete walls looming over Jack like the unyielding weight of destiny. The dim light cast long shadows, and the clinking of chains echoed as he shifted on the worn cot. Jack sat in silence, staring at the rusting bars that separated him from the world outside. He had tried to escape the reality of his fate, but with each passing day it crept closer, like a shadow growing darker as the sun sets. His gaze wandered to the small, barred window where he caught a glimpse of the setting sun. The warm hues of orange and red painted the sky, and for a moment Jack was taken back to a different time, a time when the world felt endless and his dreams were untainted by the harshness of life. Jack's earliest memories were of playing in a field with wildflowers that reached his waist. He could feel the warmth of the sun on his face, hear the distant laughter of children, and smell the sweet scent of summer. His mother, Mary, would sit under a large oak tree, watching him with a smile that could light up the darkest room. "Run, Jack! Run like the wind!" she would call, her voice filled with love and pride. Mary was everything to him, his world, his protector, his first friend. She was a single mother who had sacrificed her own dreams to raise him, working tirelessly to provide him with everything he needed. Jack remembered the late nights when she would sit by the dim glow of a lamp, sewing his clothes back together, her fingers red and raw, but her face always soft with love. No matter how exhausted she was, she would always tuck him in, kiss his forehead, and whisper, "You are my little champion, Jack. Never forget that." He had vowed to be a good son, to grow up and take care of her. But life had other plans. As he grew older, the world around him changed. The streets became harsher, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. By the time Jack was a teenager, he had fallen in with the wrong crowd. He began to drift, making choices that took him further and further from the boy who once believed in fairy tales. The day Jack took a life was seared into his memory, as clear as if it had happened only moments ago. A fight gone wrong, a flash of anger, and everything changed. The blood on his hands felt like a stain that would never wash away. He could still hear the sound of his victim's last breath, the way it rattled and echoed in his ears. He had stood there, frozen, as the reality of what he had done crashed down on him like a tidal wave. Mary had visited him after his arrest, her eyes swollen with tears, her face pale. "Why, Jack? Why did you do this?" she had asked, her voice breaking with every word. He had no answer, just the overwhelming, crushing weight of his regret. But even then, even when he felt like the world was crumbling around him, she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You're still my son," she whispered, "and I will always love you. Life has a cruel way of stripping away innocence, doesn't it?" And before he knew it, Jack found himself standing at the crossroads of youth and adulthood, where choices carried consequences that no child could ever comprehend. The streets became his playground, and the nights grew longer as he got older. He fell into the wrong company, not because he wanted to, but because he was searching for something, some validation, some sense of belonging that he felt slipping away from him. It started with petty thefts, the thrill of rebellion, and the need to prove himself. But as the years passed, the stakes grew higher, and the darkness that had always lingered at the edges of his life began to consume him. Jack could still feel the weight of the gun in his hand that fateful night, the cold, metallic sensation that seemed to burn into his skin. He remembered the sound of the shot, how it echoed through the empty alley like a final, irrevocable judgment. He watched as the man fell, his eyes wide with shock, blood pooling around him, staining the ground crimson. And in that moment, Jack's world shattered. He had crossed a line he could never uncross, and the boy who once dreamed of endless summers was gone forever. The days in prison blurred together, but one desire burned within him, a desperate need that refused to be extinguished, to see his mother one last time. When the guard told him that his request had been granted, Jack felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief, fear, and heartbreak. This would be their last moment together, and he knew no words could ever make up for the pain he had caused. The door to the visiting room creaked open, and there she was, Mary, his mother, her frail figure looking smaller than he remembered. Her hair, now completely white, fell in soft waves around her face, and her hands trembled as she clutched the worn edges of her shawl. Jack took a step toward her, but his legs felt like lead, weighed down by the enormity of his guilt. "Mom!" he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of all the unsaid apologies, all the missed moments, all the lost years. Mary looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment neither spoke, both frozen in the space between the past and the present. Then, with a choked sob, she rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him as if trying to pull him back from the brink of the abyss. "My boy!" she wept, her voice shaking. "My beautiful boy!" Jack collapsed into her arms, his body racked with sobs that tore through him like a storm. "I'm so sorry," he cried, his words muffled against her shoulder. "I've ruined everything. I've hurt you. I've destroyed everything good you gave me." Mary pulled back, cupping his face in her hands, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce with love. "No, Jack," she said firmly, her voice trembling but unyielding. "You are my son. You will always be my son, and nothing, nothing can ever change that. But I'm a monster," Jack choked out, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I've taken a life. I've destroyed everything." Mary's grip tightened, and she shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You are not a monster," she said, her voice breaking. "You are my son, my little boy who used to pick wildflowers for me, who used to dance in the rain. You made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but you are not defined by them. You are defined by the love in your heart, the love that brought you back to me today." Jack fell to his knees, his head resting against her stomach like he used to as a child, and Mary stroked his hair, whispering, "It's going to be okay. I'm here. I've always been here." There was another day etched deeply into Jack's memory, one that showed the pure, untainted bond he shared with his mother. It was the night of a fierce thunderstorm, the kind that seemed to shake the very foundations of their little home. Jack, barely 6 years old, had woken up in terror, the loud cracks of thunder and the flashing lightning making him feel as though the world was tearing apart. Trembling, he had clutched his blanket to his chest, tears streaming down his cheeks, too frightened even to call out. But before he could succumb to his fears, his bedroom door creaked open, and there stood his mother, a candle flickering in her hand, casting a warm, gentle glow. She crossed the room in just a few steps, gathering Jack into her arms, holding him close against her heart. "It's all right, my love," she soothed, her voice calm and steady, despite the storm raging outside. "It's just the sky having a bit of a grumble. It'll pass, I promise." In that moment, Jack believed her with all his heart. He believed that no storm could ever touch him, that as long as his mother was by his side, he would always be safe. And for a while that was true. For a while, the world was as it should be, a place of wonder, love, and endless possibilities. But even in those innocent days, shadows began to creep in. Jack was 9 when he first saw his father raise a hand against his mother. It was a moment that shattered something inside him, a moment that tore at the fabric of the perfect world he thought he lived in. Jack had stood there, frozen in disbelief, as his father's angry shouts echoed through their small home, his mother's face pale and drawn as she tried to shield Jack from the worst of it. When his father stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Mary had sunk to the floor, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jack had run to her, his small arms wrapping around her neck, holding on as tightly as he could. "It's all right, Mommy," he whispered, his own tears mixing with hers. "I'll protect you. I won't let him hurt you." Mary had pulled him into her lap, cradling him as she always did, her fingers running through his hair. "Oh, my sweet boy," she murmured, her voice breaking. "You're so brave. But some things are not for little boys to carry." Yet even as she said those words, Jack felt a new resolve harden in his chest, a fierce, burning need to protect the one person who had always protected him. As the years passed, Jack grew stronger, and his bond with his mother deepened. They would sit by the river bank in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Jack would rest his head in her lap, and she would tell him stories of distant lands. And Jack believed her. He believed that his future would be bright, that he would grow up to be someone who made a difference, someone who could make his mother proud. He didn't know then how cruel the world could be, how easily innocence could be stolen, or how fragile dreams truly were. The days in prison blurred together, but one desire burned within him, a desperate need that refused to be extinguished, to see his mother one last time. When the guard told him that his request had been granted, Jack felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief, fear, and heartbreak. As the guard announced that their time was up, panic gripped Jack's heart. "No," he pleaded, clutching her hand as if it were his lifeline. "Please, just a little longer." Mary nodded, tears blurring her vision. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his, their breaths mingling, their tears falling together. "You will always be with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "and I will always be with you." "Mom!" Jack sobbed, his entire body trembling. "I don't want to die. I'm so scared." Mary's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and she pulled him into one last, desperate embrace. "I know, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But you won't be alone. You'll carry my love with you always." The guards moved forward, but Jack clung to her, his nails digging into her arms as if he could anchor himself to her, to this moment, to life itself. "Please," he begged them, tears streaming down his face, "don't take me from her. Please." The moment they pulled Jack away, something inside Mary broke. She collapsed against the wall, her body racked with sobs that seemed to tear her apart from the inside out. Jack's screams echoed down the hallway, desperate, raw, and full of anguish. "Mom! Don't let them take me! Mom!" The execution was quick. Jack's body hung limply, but his eyes were closed, and for the first time in years he looked at peace. Perhaps, in that final moment, he found his way back to the boy who once ran through fields of gold, laughing in the sun. Mary stood outside the prison gates long after they had taken her boy away, her hand pressed against her heart, where she could still feel the echo of his heartbeat. And as the rain began to fall, mingling with her tears, she whispered, "You'll always be with me, Jack, always." And she knew, in that moment of infinite sadness, that love, true, unwavering, unconditional love, could never be taken away. It lived on, even in the darkness, even in the silence, forever unbroken. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share for more interesting stories.